yesterday we had the wonderful Gary, so this is just a complete delight for me. So hello Maggie, and it's going to be really interesting to hear your views and your points on some of the current issues that are facing birth parents and families within Scotland and children. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'll give you the floor.
Right. Hi, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for inviting me, Fiona. I hope that what I'm going to say is going to be helpful and informative. So I work with families today, many of them facing the challenge of threat of adoption or adoptions that have actually happened. So I'll start with something that you all know, which is that the Scottish Government has apologised to mothers whose children were forcibly adopted in the 1950s, 60s and 70s without the mothers having, or the children having any reasonable, meaningful choice in this. So the pain of this history has long been recognised now of this, what was really a transfer of children from single mothers to what they were told and what the society was told was going to be much better families for these children. So what I'm going to ask today is, what, if anything, is better today as a result of that apology? I believe that people at the conference will, like me, have spanned a number of years, or a lot of you will span a number of years from what was the high tide of adoptions. Some of you will be in among that number of the 60s and 70s to the relatively smaller number since the 80s, really, and up to today that are being adopted. So I think the questions I would ask, or think that society needs to ask, is what children are being adopted today? Is adoption only happening when nothing else will do, as it's supposedly the law, and nothing else will do to ensure that a child has a family? Or is adoption still being used to transfer ownership of children to better families? So I trained in the 1970s, and I have a good memory for this whole history. In fact, I was there, and also my husband Gary, as you heard, those of you who are here yesterday, is as a birth father. So we have adoption in the family, and in that way, a good story of post-adoption where we're all in touch, and Jane's very much part of our family. So I've got personal experience and professional experience. So what I was going to look at is, what are the differences between adoption then and adoption now? And then in the 1960s, adoption was so prevalent that it's been calculated that it directly affected 1 in 10 people in the population. That is, 1 in 10 people had either been adopted or had adopted or were the parents of a child who had been adopted. So, and it's still true that if you mention adoption in a conversation with anybody, you know, at a party, people will say they know somebody who is adopted or was a birth mother. And certainly in my knowledge, personal life, and all sorts of other places, this was very prevalent. Now it's not nearly so prevalent as a current adoption. And it had declined to very low levels in the 1980s, really, because as you know, there was contraception and abortion were available, and single women and weren't having babies in high numbers. And then it rose again, and I remember this, there was a policy to sort of push adoption for those children who were in care. That was in the 1980s, and social workers were told. I actually was fortunate in that I wasn't involved in any of that. I was much more on the sort of community family support side, but social workers were told children in their care had to be put up for adoption within a very short time of coming into care, and that was to avoid drift. So similarities, so that's right. The similarities are, compared to those differences, much fewer children, much less, more concentrated on people, families in adversity. But similarities are that adoption is still promoted as a guarantee of a better life for the children concerned. Mothers are still subjected to stigma and to cruel and inhuman treatment at the point of birth. Mothers who are subject either at the point of birth or at the point of removal of the child. Children who are adopted are still considered fortunate to have been rescued, and there's little done to provide them with any positive knowledge of their origins. because obviously if you have been forcibly adopted, it's because your parents weren't good enough. So it's very hard to, nothing that's said by the local authority in making their case for adoption is positive about the parents. And it's hard to go back afterwards to then go, oh no, they were really lovely, or no, they were fine, or they were very talented, because that would have removed the whole point of the adoption. So just like today as well, the similarity is that no one knows what the outcome of these enforced transplants of children from the birth family to another family are. How many of these adoptions succeed, and what would success look like? How many fail? How many children end up back in care or in care? How many are estranged from their adoptive families at 16 or 17, or maybe a bit later, but they, for all intents and purposes, don't have family. Now, I know that many will do and have, do have good links with adoptive parents, and but we don't know how many and what success looks like. So just to say a little bit about my experience, I work independently as an independent social worker, but I also, there's a small charity that I help run, I'm a co-chair of, and our charity is called PAR, Parent Advocacy and Rights, and it's parent-led and professionally supported is how we describe it. So what our aim is to help prevent children being taken into care and to support parents to get their children home, and just to support parents to have their voices heard in decisions. We call it enhanced advocacy, really, that we offer. It's not just helping the parent to say what they feel, but it helps them to form to voice and develop an informed view that's based on professional knowledge, and that helps the parents to be able to actually have a greater say and also a greater impact. If you've ever had to go into a meeting where there's maybe 10 professionals, most of whom you've never met and have never met your child, and on your own, and knowing that they have been pre-discussing you and that much of what they think about you or believe about you is critical, it's terrifying. And so we find we can turn that around a bit. And my own private work includes children where local authorities are applying for permanence orders and permission to arrange adoption. So adoption features in quite a number of the PAR cases as the intended plan for a child of the parents that we work with, or it may already have happened. Quite often, especially for older children, the court agreed plan for adoption and a permanence order is being granted. I gather Gary before me was talking about the sort of legal side of this. It hasn't actually happened. So some of the parents we work with, their children are kind of legal orphans, or they're in limbo because the parents have had parental rights removed, a permanence order, or most of their parental rights removed, and a permanence order has been made, which gives the local authority most of those rights. But the local authority has got the authority to adopt, but they haven't got an adoption. So these parents live with some parents live with the pain of knowing their child's adopted and knowing they don't know what's happening to them, or whether they're still adopted, or if they're in care, or if they're being badly treated. They live with that pain. But other parents live with the pain of having children in care that they know are just in limbo and waiting and hoping they're spending their childhoods waiting. In the private cases, I see cases of children who've been removed at birth or in the first year of life, and also older children who are removed at any age up to 8, 9, 10. The older the child, we know, the less likely that they will be adopted. But that doesn't prevent that plan being made for children, even though it's a very low likelihood. That the local authority plans for the child don't really reflect that until a certain point when they switch the lights off, and it's they accept that this child, that's just not going to happen for them. And so just because a local authority has got the permanence order and got the authority to arrange an adoption doesn't mean that child will be adopted. And but just because that's happened, in my experience, that doesn't mean that the local authority then reviews its position for this child and actually thinks, well, what is this child's best interest now? Although I gather some local authorities are But I mean, you question I wonder about, you know, taking a child at birth or thereafter, having the child for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, or 4 years even, not being able to arrange, you know, not being able to act in the child's best interest, and then turning around to the family and saying, oh, how do you feel about, you know, resuming care? I mean, most families would leap at it, but of course, it's quite a, you know, it's quite a different situation than bringing a child up from birth yourself. So a recent study on infants, it's by Gillian Rabb, it's for, was it for Joseph Rowntree, or no, it wasn't, but it's a study on infants removed at birth, aged up to 1 year. And some of these children are now 16 years, because the study was of, it was administrative statistics, just ones that are normally kept for all children, but they were able to pull out of it the children who were removed and then removed into care, and then what happened to them. So many who are removed do return to their parents or to wider family kinship care, and they had then counted as having left care. However, for the children who weren't returned to their family, it was found that it took an average of, I think, 2 years and 7 months for an adoption order to be made. Now, I cannot, for the life of me, think of any good plan that means you take a child from their mother at birth. This is even worse than the 1960s and 70s in a sense, in that child will then go to foster care. That child will then be, might have more than one placement. I think many have 2, some have 3 placements before they're adopted. Some will be placed directly with foster parents who have been approved to adopt, but they'll also be being taken regularly to respite care, which is never mentioned. So the foster parents get a break. So sometimes it's as much as every 6 weeks, sometimes it's longer. Some of these children are difficult to care for because they've been removed from their mothers and they are upset. They tend to be, I think some of them have been of mothers with substance abuse problems, and that's undeniable. So they will have impacts from that. But other children, it's not that they're healthy, but they're just quite difficult to care for because they're jittery, you know, as you would be removed from your life support system. So anyway, these children, to know that you're taking a child and going to subject the child to multiple carers who don't love it for 2.5 years at least, and maybe forever, seems to me highly a risk, like just ethically not a good choice, not a good option, and also highly risky. And what they found it was, by their 12th birthday, 47% of children who started care under 1 week old have been adopted. The percentage is lower for those starting care between 1 week and 1 year. So 47% have adopted. Some will have gone home to parents. Some will just still be in care. Of all children entering care aged under 1 year, 14% are still in some form of care by their 16th birthday. So, I mean, that's the statistics, what we know of what happens to these children. We don't know more than that, because nobody's actually collecting the statistics meaningfully. This is just extracted from administrative ones. So I get access in my work to the full case records of a child, right from sometimes before birth, their family, and they're painful to read. And what's particularly painful to me is the confidence of social workers and others that they're doing the right thing, that they're rescuing a child for a better life. They're planning from very early on for permanence and adoption. They do what's called parenting capacity assessments, which there is no real science or veracity to underpin it, you know, and also they're carried out they're called that in essence, but it might amount to 2 meetings. It might amount to just long sessions with the mother, grilling her about all sorts of things, and then condemning her or for giving the child grapes without cutting them or whatever. I can't even begin to describe some of the weirdnesses of a parenting capacity assessment. But then, you know, I look at the files and I count you know, these children, the social workers who took them thought that they'd rescued them and they were going to go to happy ever after land. But then I count the number of moves some of these children have had, the number of strangers' houses they've been placed in, the number of short breaks with respite carers, the number of escorts, the number of contact supervisors who change and are not the caseworker. And you realise that the certainty of the local authority hasn't been fulfilled. And they're not measuring it either. They're not looking back. If it's the same social worker or a different social worker, the authority seems to be on a path that they're incapable of reconsidering. They're in it and they're sticking with it. In PAR's work, so those cases, it's very, very difficult because by the time they come to court, the sheriff is and the social worker, the local authority are saying, this child is settled, they have no relationship with their parents, and therefore it's in their best interest to stay where they are. So it's very, you know, it's difficult to do. Anyway, we can talk about that. But in PAR's work, because we're in touch with the families over many years, that's a much more satisfying contact. We're there when some of these children come limping back after years in care, because once they sort of age out near about 12 or so, there's no longer any pretense that they're going to find a family for them. So these children they become more and more disturbed, more and more angry, they are self-harming. They're 12, so they're 12, 13, 14, they're beginning to think, wait a minute, what's happened to me? You know, where is my mother? Who's my father? What are my roots? And so they're much more challenging. They can't be easily assuaged or take simple explanations. So there's just a constant struggle to keep their placements with foster carers going. They've been placed with these carers being told, oh, we're going to find an adoptive family. You're not the permanent carer, you're a temporary carer. And then it drags on. And the carer's going, wait a minute, me and my husband are going to retire, or, you know, and this child's really difficult. So there's this struggle to keep the placement going. Social workers are often at this time reporting to hearings that the child's thriving and doing well and is happy and settled. I've even seen cases where the social worker knows very well that they're moving that child, the foster mother is giving up, but they have told a hearing 1 week in order to get the order renewed, and then we'll proceed with moving the child. They do have to go back to a hearing after that to explain it, but by that time it's happened and the parent has lost that time when they could have challenged what was going on. The children are never brought to their hearings. Now, even though they've got an absolute right to come, in practice, most children are not brought to their hearing, unless they're older children who are being brought for offending or truancy. But they have to really, and if a mother asks for a child to come, the hearing generally just will say it's not, you know, it's the child's choice and they don't want to come. So you never know. The cases I've come across where I've actually intervened and been involved, the child does want to come, but they want to be supported, but they have no idea it's even happening. So they might be asked to fill in a form that says, how do you like your life? Do you like your foster mother? And what child is going to write no? Because they're going home. They're going home at the end of that hearing, so they're not going to say that. And actually, the foster mother might be helping them write it, or their social worker. So what you then have is the local authority then is paying for very expensive care through profit-making agencies that supply carers. These foster parents are paid a salary and very generous allowances. So all the money that might have been spent on supporting families is being drained away into private carers, private care agencies and charities, which also charge a fortune. It's their kind of cash cow, really. Charities make a profit out of care services, some of which they reinvest in providing family support services. So that's very sad when parents have not been offered support and help on just very basic things that might have really made a difference. And also when the local authority at the point of removal has refused to pay for a residential assessment. There's the Lilias Graham Trust in Stirling area, does residential family assessments. It's the only one in the country. Can you imagine it? We can afford thousands of, like millions of pounds on foster care, but we don't. And look, the Lilius, I know a solicitor who's taken a couple of local authorities to judicial review and won to get to stop the child being removed at birth, or to reunite the mother and child after they've been removed. And so it's the obvious thing you would do if it's not obviously safe to leave a child at home for whatever, you know, it might be drug and alcohol abuse, it might be mother's mental health, it might be there's a violent partner around that you want to just see how mum copes on her own and support her to be away. But it seems the most obvious thing to do, and yet it's the least resource thing that we have. Some of them are young people who've been in care themselves. So they've been at 17, had a baby with somebody they also met in care, equally vulnerable and alone and not really ready for independence. And the local authority is like, well, you can't be a good parent because you've been in care. We know, we know what's happened to you. So we know that you're a very damaged person. And so we're not letting you keep this child. And then they've got to see their child taken and to be put into this system themselves. So I acknowledge that there is some truth in what I'm often accused of. Well, I've got the benefit of hindsight that the social workers acting at that time don't have. And there is an element, there is truth in that. However, in most cases, I would say that the outcomes of separating children from their mothers and their wider families are usually only too foreseeable. When it happens in Mexico, when the American government separated children from their families, everybody was horrified. When it happens anywhere, people are horrified. When we hear about it in, you know, children that were removed to the Commonwealth, everybody knows it's not, that was a terrible thing to do when you took children from mothers and sent them. So why would you think it'd be any different with this? So I don't need hindsight. I've got foresight, and usually I can pick up a case and I could look at and just say, I know this child will be in residential care, and I get to the point and the child is in residential care. But not to say, of course, that there aren't cases I don't hear anything about because they've been handled really, really well. You know, young care leavers have been well supported, you know, given lots of the support that they need, and they're able to stay with their families. And I know there are such cases, but I can only speak from my experience of the ones that aren't. So I think what's absent is an understanding of child development. I find that's an absence in the records that I see, and any understanding of a child's reaction to the loss of their mother. These seem to be shockingly absent. So in fact, I've had personal experience. I've sat at meetings where foster mothers and social workers were complaining about a child screaming at night and bedwetting, and saying to the mother, that's because somehow they were abused in the mother's care. But it's not that at all. They've just been separated. Nobody's even bothered to find out what this is actually, I'm talking from real truths. Nobody's bothered to find out what this child's favorite food is, what their bedtime routine is, how, you know, what mum would say. And when you get a good foster mother who does that and says to the mum, you know, the foster mother's got no control over whether the child's removed or goes back. But when the foster mother can work with the mother and say, every night at 6 o'clock, we're going to be on the doorstep, we're going to be blowing kisses, and I'm going to read your story, that I'm going to play your story that you've sent in a cassette, the child can be reassured. But of course, so there are things you can do, but no, it's generally seen as being bad parenting has caused this bad child to be disturbed, and not bad child, this disturbed child. And then when the child becomes depressed and angry, when they're fed up, being taken to see their mother 3 times a week and hopeful. There was one wee boy said to me recently, I woke up every morning packed, hoping this would be the day I was going home. And it was never the day I was going home. Now, this wee boy is home with his mum, but he still carries around an enormous bag with him, an enormous backpack. But it's just him saying, every day I woke up thinking, but at some points he actually refused to see his mother, which was used to tell his mother he didn't want to come home. But he said, well, no, I refused to see her because we had somebody listening to every word we said, and every word I said was taken back to, you know, the carer and used against me, and I would get into trouble. So I couldn't see my mother. It was too dangerous, and also it was horrible. And I wanted just to go home. I didn't want to have an hour and then go back to where I was. I wanted just to go home, and it was too painful not to. But nobody will ever even consider those explanations for the child. The mother's not allowed to say she wants the child home, that she's fighting in court, that she would have him home in a minute. So the mother's told to pretend that they think it's the best thing, that this is the best thing, that the social workers are doing the right thing and they know what's they're, you know, doing the right, you know. So all of it's just toxic, really. I can't describe it in any other way. And I read in the files of children being moved from foster home to contact and from foster home to respite care. So these children, if you know what their lives are like, you're saying, oh my God, every time they get put in a car, this is infants I'm talking about, every time they get picked up, separated from their foster mother, put in a car, they don't know whether they're going to respite care and might not see this woman again for a week, 3 days, or they don't know if they're going to see their mother, but then be taken away. So I mean, it just seems like a recipe for a very, very upset child. So now, like I said, I only get the cases where there's disagreement. I have to believe that there are cases where children are supported to stay at home, where social, and I do actually know some really good social workers who go out of their way to do that, and who, you know, I know one who goes in early in the morning before her official work because she wouldn't be allowed to do it, but just to support a mum to get herself organised to, and for the good, anyway. But so I know there are cases, and I know it's possible to work with people for good outcomes if you're using evidence-based and empathy and humanity. But the fact is, we don't know. People can tell me, but I get criticised for criticising these arrangements and told, oh no, there's thousands of cases where, no, most of the cases you're just, you know, and you, yeah, okay, so give me the proof. Why don't we know? Why are there not statistics? Why are we not regularly checking in on these children? If you have a child who's subjected to, has got leukemia or a childhood cancer, they have treatment. Well, the medics are actually checking in on them for the rest of their childhoods, at least, and sometimes longer, just to actually look at, and they're measured, and we have outcomes and we have research. Not for these children. Research is at a minimum. So all I can say is, from my experience, I would say there hasn't been an improvement in the experience of mothers or fathers or of the children. The adoption apology movement was successful, I think, because there were so many people affected, and so many of the children grew up, but the mothers who had been 19, 20 became, you know, confident, mature women. Later on, they'd had children, or they hadn't, but they were able to speak up and make a movement, a really impressive movement, to actually, you know, over years though, but you know, out they came, which was great. But I think parents today are much fewer in number, and most of them belong to the poorest and least well-resourced communities. So nevertheless, I think there will come a time when it will have to be recognised that forcible adoption is cruel, it doesn't work, it uses up massive resources that should be used to support families and alleviate the kind of adversities and challenges that make it hard for parents to do their best. So it's not in the arrangements today, and adoption today is not in children's best interests any more than the adoptions of the last century. So that is my verdict, and I'm sorry that it's so sad and negative, but I think there's a lot of work to be done in trying to tackle that. So
Maggie, thank you. You actually brought me to tears at one point. Do you know, I remember the first time we sat down at this conversation and we spoke about these things, and you know, I deal with adoptees who have come back into the system through their own children, and it is something it's a special issue to me because of the adoptees that I support. And so yes, thank you, because I think people don't see this issue, and it never really gets spoken about enough. And so I thank you so much for coming. One of the things that I wanted to say to you was, do you feel that in some respects social workers possibly don't have the mechanisms to look at the care system in a whole, and rather than just these little, it seems to always be, right, we're going to do this point, and then we're going to do this point, and then we're going to do this point, rather than looking at a whole. And the final thing, and then I'll open up to everybody else, was, do you feel that because one of the recommendations the SAM group have put in is the right to be known, and the reason that we've put that in is because we do feel that there's a lack of data and statistics, and we've brought that to the promise. We've said, look, there's just some real issues here, that if you're making decisions now, there's not enough evidence to back up those decisions. And so I would really like your kind of thoughts on that, and then I'll open up to the panel.
Right. Yeah. Well, on social workers, yeah, definitely. But I think there's an issue of, well, there's a number of issues, but one certainly is that you can take a social worker, newly qualified or with relatively little experience or loads of experience, can take a child into care. Right. They can do it. Well, they have to go and get an order, but that is open to them to do. That will then cost the local authority up million. It could cost them over the lifetime of that child, if so that's what's opening that door. But if a social worker just wants £150 to do a shopping or buy a mattress or pay for a holiday for a mum, do any of those things, you can't do it. You can't get it. You will not get it. It's very hard to even get a tenner for, well, it'd be £20 to top up the electricity. So in that way, yeah, social workers have got their hands tied behind their back. And I think that a lot of them panic if they think, oh my God, I am going to be that social worker on the front page of the Daily Mail or the Sun, that you left that child to die, because they've been faced with a really upset mum saying, I'll kill myself, or, oh, I can't cope anymore, and and they can't do the things that would help the mum to cope, like put in family support, family aids, just get some bills cleared, get some benefits advice, get some support. They can't do that, so the child comes into care. But also, and the big thing is risk. Everything is deficits and risk, and not positives. And for the number of children killed by their parents has not grown. It's terrible, but it's not like, and it hasn't grown or diminished. And we know from the cases over, there was a few horrible cases that, we miss as many of them, and yet there's children in care who shouldn't be in care. So there's that. And statistics, yes, evidence, we need evidence. Unbelievable that you could be doing something so long and you don't even know if it works, or what, or what success would mean. But even on some very basic measures, it doesn't seem successful.
Yeah, or even the death rates, there's none. There's nothing.
No, I mean, and when people have looked at I worked in leaving care in London after the 89 Act came in England, and which gave care leaver, there was services were set up, and I got a job of setting up a care leaver service in London, and I was just appalled. Every child, the amount of child abuse that had gone on, because children could get to see their records then. So we were having teenagers and young adults and older adults come back going, I want to see my records. And then I stopped saying, oh, but I just started kind of asking, oh, so when were you abused in care? Because that's what they wanted. A lot of them want to see. They want to see why they've been taken away from their parent, and whether that foster parent or that residential worker had ever been caught, and did people know, and why, when he said that this had happened, when the child said this had happened, why, so there's that. And also the deaths, I counted something like 14. There was children in care who killed another person. There was a child, young, this is as care leavers, but yes, I just counted up these deaths, and I know that since that time more of those children will have died.
It's a really hard topic, but I think it's one that needs to be in the conversation. So
yes,
so
definitely. Thanks for raising it. Yeah.
Dawn, I've asked you to unmute. You want a question?
Hi, Maggie. Thank you for your absolutely massive insight. There's a couple of points. Are there actually many social workers like yourself? Are there anybody, many like you?
Well, in PAR, there's my great colleague Kat Grant, and yeah, God, there must be, but I don't think they're in local authorities. No, I mean, I've met some great people, actually much better social workers than me, if you like. Actually, and yeah, they definitely exist, but and there might be good. I don't like to be critical. I mean, it sounds, because I was probably a crap social worker as well when I was newly qualified. I look back and I think, oh God, I didn't actually take children into care because I was really kind of, yeah. I mean, I think if you come from I came from a big family, kind of working class family. We know, you kind of just thought, I wasn't into any of that. I wasn't into this adoption and happy ever after stuff and everything. So I think of some things and go, oh God, that was, naive, that was crass, that was maybe a cruel. So I was a crap social worker too. And I think a lot of the local authority ones, that they're actually given a much worse situation than I had. I got to learn. I had people who were patient with me. I learned from experience. So, and I don't think that's on offer nowadays. They last about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and the other thing, obviously, it's Fee's just said, Maggie, you want still 1 in a million. I think that's horrific. It's good that you are, because I'm the first that I've spoke like that. But and the other thing, sorry, but the other thing is, right. So if all this money is being given to foster families, paid to foster families, and some good, some bad, I'll be mindful of this one. So some good foster families and some not so good. Okay, so this money comes from somewhere, and who benefits? I've seen. I've done very limited research onto the private sector of children's homes, and then I've seen their like offset reports and things of the homes, and they've been atrocious, absolutely atrocious. So somebody, people are just making money out of the suffering of others, when if the intervention, like you said, it is one of the things I've always said is, when a 15, 16-year-old is on her own and has a baby, why aren't they kept together and put with, say, a suitable older mum or family, and then taught to parents? Because when you have your first child, it is difficult, even if you're 16, even if you're 21, even if you're 30, it's difficult. It's a very, very, massive thing to take on. So that could be put into place, and that could save that. If all she needed was a home and support and practical, what mums do, well, dads too, give.
Absolutely. I think the promise made a big mistake when they did the independent care review. They let it be led by people that basically have skin in the game in the care system. The stakeholders, as they called them, they excluded parents, they excluded communities. Now, we had proposed to them at one time, look, why don't you go and actually have an inquiry or meetings and things in the areas where most of these children come from, are taken from. You could look at Edinburgh and I could tell you where are the areas that are having children removed and put into middle class areas, which are there, or better. So they're getting all the money. That's who can buy a car, that's who's paying the mortgage, but these areas are having drained of children and drained of resources. What about, I would go for really make like community resourcing. So if you said there's in Bingham or whatever the areas are, Drumchapel, Easterhouse in Glasgow, this is the money that is taken out of here and spent and on somewhere else. Because I think there's parents and grandparents, like there's women of 40 odd who had a baby. They had a Wayne when they were 16 and 17. They went through the hard way. And they understand how social workers don't understand. They've been through it, but they arrive at a point of wisdom and strength. A lot of them do. Some get destroyed, but they would be the people that could help, you know, build up the resources that those communities need with the money that's needed. There was a great guy, a really good social worker, like really good, Bob Holman, who died. But he spent his whole life, he lived in Easterhouse, he moved his family into Easterhouse. And he always said, look, all this money, we say we've got the Easterhouse Regeneration Fund, with, you know, all these millions of pounds that get spent in these communities. He said it never gets spent there. It pays social workers and development workers mortgages, it buys their cars. They drive in the morning and they drive away at night. But you know, we could be doing something. So his view was definitely put the money into the area, resource the areas, because at the moment they're a bit of a cash cow for private companies, and private companies floated on the stock exchange, some of them, because it was so lucrative. So, but so the promise, I just think the promise missed a lot of, they didn't do strict, and they didn't do statistics, they didn't do research, they didn't do a real, before, until they were nearly finished, they sort of did a little bit of exercise about where's the money going. But that could have, they should have started with a rigorous approach at the beginning, instead of all this folderol and having, I mean, they had Bernardos and people chairing working groups. And we said, fair enough, can there be a working group on supporting families with parents involved to tell you what it's like to be a parent of a child in care? And they said, oh no, we couldn't have parents involved because some of the young people that we were working with have been abused by their parents. So it would be upsetting for them. And like the parents were like, what, wait a minute, you've got Bernardos, you've got, you know, all of these charities that there's been huge, they've been found wanting in abuse inquiry after abuse inquiry. From way back, removing children to the Commonwealth, you know, and children being abused in institutional care. There's an inquiry going on right now, and yet, you know, the stakeholders were allowed to really kind of lead the care review, which was wrong. Families should have, and I think if they'd done that, they would have actually had much better results if they'd actually had not just tokenistically having some young people who, you know, they got involved in the inquiry, but working with parents and families and with people. I don't mean sitting children on tables to say, what do you think? You know, that's not, it should be much, it's much more like, what are the experiences of children in care? What are the, you know, whenever we do research it, we find out what they want is to, most of them want to see more of their families and are sad and upset that that's not prioritized. You know, so you get these messages, but nothing's done with them. Sorry, I can run on at the mouth forever. So, don't know if anybody's got any other questions. I see somebody else has got a hand up.
Yeah, Lindsay can have a question, and then I think it's.
I know I've got my eye on the time as well. That I would love to hear more, but I've got my eye on the time as well, and I'm interested to hear more about the community development as opposed to a system based on risk. However, what I was going to just ask you to tease apart was you mentioned the absence of knowledge of child development being used, and I wondered if you thought that was a financial thing, as in some people have access to best practice if you've got money, and if you don't have money then these things don't apply, which I've heard medically said, and maybe it's emotional and psychological as well, and or how much difference it makes for the people who are in the system not having their own emotional intelligence grounded in how they do their work.
Yeah, I think the training in social work, it leaves a lot to be desired, in that they get taught other people like psychology, so you get psychology, sociology, law, but the actual practice of the work and using evidence to inform your practice, all sorts of evidence, and the humanity of the job, or the need for humanity, and how not to blunt yourself, all of those things, that there needs to be, if people are going to do this work, they need a lot more, and it doesn't need to be expensive. It just needs to be real. And I think that is a real lack. They come out, and child development's not taught. It was barely taught. You might get Erickson's 7 Stages of Man or something, or whatever it is, but they don't, and if in the absence of that knowledge, you're not getting psychology, what should be a multidisciplinary thing, never really, it doesn't happen like that. What the social worker, their assessment goes. And there's no psychologists employed by local authorities. They're barely used as experts. I mean, I at one time was saying, look, why don't we have like professors of social work in local authorities? You know how there's professors in branches of medicine work in hospitals, they have patients, they work with the junior doctors and train them. Why don't we have that but then you see a lot of our professors of social work haven't done any social work for 30 years. So what would but they can bring insights, but do you know what I mean? But that might have been a really good interplay, or be a good interplay between academia and practice, but actually bring them together and see what results. But I'm a sort of community development tendency myself.
Hi, Maggie. This is hi, nice to see you today, and I'm so honoured to be speaking to you. You've done so well today on the Zoom. It's amazing. I just wanted to ask you, obviously, being put in care as an older child, I was roughly about 7 years old when I was put into care, and it greatly affected me moving forward, and I didn't get the supports I needed. But I wondered, can you hear me okay? Yes, yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
What is your view on why families relinquish their children into care and then into adoptions? My own view is that I feel it is about the lack of supportive environments that enable the mother and the father and the child to stay together, whether there is substance abuse or domestic violence, etc. And do you think this is to do with lack of services to enable better forms of practical domestic support availability to allow that child back into family, as I personally feel bias and coercive controls can be a huge factor in both the services, the fostering family or the adoptive family, in a child not being able to go back to the family, even into reunion?
Well, I mean, the thing about relinquishing, there's two. I mean, some parents have the children removed or compulsory. Most children in care are compulsorily in care. Now, some of them, and this has now been much criticised, the parent will sign voluntarily for their child to be in care, but often it's actually with a gun to their head. They're being told, oh, sign, or we're going to get a CPO, we're going to get a child protection order. So in England, there was that was much more prevalent, or as prevalent as it is in Scotland, but it's been diminished over recent years because it was so criticised, because it's not really a voluntarily putting your child into care. It was parents doing it because they were told that was the better, it was better that than compulsory, because they thought, well, then at any time you can withdraw your consent. That's the theory. But of course you can't if you're then going to immediately, the minute you say, I want my child back, it's actually going to become compulsory. But there are parents who, and it may be mothers, I don't come across them. I come across mothers that wept and fought and cried, and some of them that did really made bad choices, or were just so upset that they couldn't do the right thing, or they lost it. But I think there's a question of, you can have such low self-esteem that you might think that anybody else would be a better parent for your child than you are, because you feel so rubbish. And I actually kind of never had that feeling, and I think most mothers probably, you just go, no, I know, but you can feel like, oh, I need some help. But I think if you've got really low self-esteem, you might think, oh, and that's, some mothers that you read about that are really quite neglectful and leave their child with strangers and different people. Like, they get a new boyfriend and they'll leave the child with them. And a psychologist once, because I was, as a younger social worker, talking about that, going, oh my God, they're leaving they left. How could you do that? Why didn't? And this psychologist pointed out that they actually might genuinely believe that anybody, and that's why they're so prey to coercive and controlling men who can say, oh, that child's got you wrapped around their fingers and you, and they just feel anybody has got a better answer than they do. So the answer there would be to really help that mother build up to get in touch with their feelings of competence to be competent, and to support them to either regain care of the child or to keep care of the child. I don't know if that, I mean, obviously you've got your own personal story and I don't know that, and it could be anywhere on a kind of spectrum of any of those things, but those are my thoughts. Most parents, most mothers are desperately upset and bereft. Some of them may have suffered losses in their lives themselves before, which make them unequipped to actually fight or to feel or to act on or to even recognize the pain they're feeling, because they can't identify too much with that child because that would be too painful. That's a bit of a ramble, but I think there's a number of explanations. But yeah, we need more empathic, informed, really mature practice and resources that go with it. And I think there would be a big change if that happened.
Thank you, Maggie. I really appreciate it. I realise George is coming on in a minute, so I'll
Yeah,
hand it over to Fiona. But thank you so much for that. I really
So
appreciate
thanks for listening.
Thank you. No problem.
Maggie, I just want to say something because I didn't think the conversation would go this way. And, for all of you listening, I don't share very much. But this idea of support with foster family is something that I can't believe we've come to. And I'm going to share this. I was born in the care system. My birth mother was 15. And we went to a mother and baby home and they split us up. And for 6 months after we were split up, her foster family fought with social services to keep us both.
Mm.
And it was lost. It was in vain. And I just can't quite believe it. It's given me goosebumps. I've had tears. I can't quite believe that we've come to this. I want to say thank you. I really do. From the moment that I first met you, Maggie, you filled me with so much information. And I think, looking at the chat and looking at how today and the conversation that we've had, I don't think anybody here can say that you're not absolutely amazing and the salt of the earth, Maggie. You really are. You're absolutely amazing and you're a credit. Thank you. And if everybody wants to raise their applause for Maggie, because it really was amazing. I can't.
Thank you, guys.